In January 2026, four young women in military uniforms crawled across a frozen minefield in negative 22-degree Fahrenheit darkness, not fleeing a war but escaping the country they had sworn to defend. Park Ji-yoon enlisted at 18, believing the army would feed her family. What she found instead was a system that weaponized loyalty to silence, starve, and exploit its own soldiers. Her story isn't ancient history. It happened 47 days ago, and 25 million people are still living inside it right now. If these stories matter to you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us bring these untold stories to light. Together, we can be a voice for those who cannot speak. My name is Park Ji-yoon. I'm from Wonsan in the province of Gangwon. You may have heard of Myeongsa-simni Beach, the endless stretch of white sand, the sound of cool waves rolling in. That's how I remember my hometown. Beautiful, almost dreamlike. But behind that beauty, there was always a shadow. Hunger that brought tears to your eyes. Surveillance that never left your side. I enlisted at 18. I wasn't thinking clearly back then. Someone told me the military would feed you well. That joining might ease the burden on my family. That was enough. In North Korea, serving as a female soldier is considered an honor, a source of pride for your entire family. But I had no idea that uniform would swallow my life whole. I was assigned as a corporal at a frontline border guard unit, what you'd call a GP or guard post. Only those with the strongest verified loyalty are sent to positions like that. They call you the flower protecting the fatherland. They build you up with language like that. But the truth hiding behind those words was brutal beyond description. Can you imagine how cold a North Korean winter gets? Especially in a mountain valley at the front line, bone-cutting cold doesn't even begin to cover it. The winter that stretched from late 2025 into early 2026 was particularly savage. In temperatures that dropped to negative 22 Fahrenheit, we stood overnight guard duty with nothing but worn-out mittens to keep us warm. Our hands and feet had been frostbitten so long we'd stopped feeling them, but the hunger that was worse than the cold. We had a grand title, the Border Guard. In reality, we were starving wolves. Rations had long since stopped coming. We survived on a handful of corn, maybe half a bowl a day, and half of that was stones and dirt. To those of you who are older, do you remember what people used to call the barley hump, that brutal stretch before the harvest, when food ran out? In North Korea, that's every single day of the year. The youngest in our unit was a private first class I'll call Lee. She'd lost her parents during the arduous march, North Korea's famine years, and had joined the military on one hope that she'd finally get to eat rice. One day her hand, thin as a twig from malnutrition, grabbed my sleeve. "Corporal," she whispered, "is it true that in the South people eat white rice every day?" I couldn't answer, because every night through our binoculars, we could see the lights on the other side of the fence, South Korean lights, bright, warm, and relentless, a city that never went dark. We stood there every night, staring at those lights across the wire. And we thought, over there is a place for human beings. Over here is a place for animals. North Korean authorities always told us. The people of South Korea were starving under American occupation, suffering in misery. But what our own eyes showed us told a different story. How could people living in misery keep their lights on through the night like that? But even whispering that question out loud meant death. The North Korean system is a finely engineered prison. Your comrade watches you. You watch your comrade. You call each other comrade, but you don't trust each other for a single second. That was the daily life of female soldiers in North Korea. We were treated like flowers, but only when we were in uniform, marching for the cameras. The moment the ceremony ended and we returned to the post, we became something else entirely, servants to the senior officers. We gathered firewood, did their laundry, and were forced to smile on command to keep them entertained. Any loyalty to the regime had long since burned away. What remained was pure instinct survive. And beneath that, a silent, desperate prayer. Just one day of living like a human being. That is the first thing I want you to understand. The crisp uniform we wore wasn't a source of pride. It was a chain around our souls. We held rifles and claimed we were defending the fatherland, but the truth is, we were slowly dying, not from enemy bullets, but from hunger and fear of the very people we served. Yet even in that darkness, the four of us saw something in each other's eyes. Without words, we felt it. We can't keep living like this. Getting to that decision took things I can barely bring myself to say out loud. Why would young women in the prime of their lives risk death to climb a militarized fence? In the next chapter, I'll tell you about the ugliness hidden inside that army and the moment that finally pushed us over the edge. Every time I stood before a mirror in uniform, I repeated the same words like a mantra. I am the flower of the fatherland, ready to give my life for the party and the supreme leader. It didn't take long to realize those words weren't inspiration. They were poison. Slow-acting, soul-corroding poison. They called us the Iron Women guarding the front lines of the nation. But what we actually faced wasn't the protection of soldiers. It was the servitude of slaves, feeding the desires of the men above us. Our platoon commander was a woman I'll call Choi So-hee. Sharp, strong, and fiercely capable at 28, she carried the lives of 12 soldiers on her shoulders. She was the one who always steadied us when we cracked. Then one day she began to fall apart herself. Her eyes were always swollen. The voice that once cut through noise like a blade had shrunk to a trembling whisper. It started with the battalion's deputy commander, a man of the rank of lieutenant colonel, and his relentless summons. "So he said, I hear your father has been having trouble back home because of his background. If I put in a word, I could fix that. Get you into the party. Give your family a future." That offer was the beginning of hell. In North Korea, party membership is the only ladder to a better life, the lifeline that determines whether your family survives. The officers knew exactly where to press. Sexual coercion, dressed up in the language of loyalty, was an open secret inside our unit. Every night, through the gap under the platoon commander's door, came the sound of muffled sobbing. Hearing it, I asked myself for the first time, who exactly is our rifle supposed to be pointed at? The army that claimed to protect the people was crushing the daughters of those people. The state sang only of the supreme leader's greatness and turned its back on every scream. As winter 2025 set in, things got worse. The food shortage spared no one, not even the frontline guard posts. Supply lines had been dead for months. The officers sold off the cooking oil and rice that were supposed to come down to us, pocketed the money at the market. What reached us was corn mixed with rocks and dirt. When the political officer lined us up in the freezing pre-dawn courtyard to lecture us about the revolutionary spirit of self-reliance, what rose in our guts wasn't loyalty. It was a rage deeper than death. Private Lee's condition deteriorated by the day. Her face had gone yellow from malnutrition. Her legs had swollen to twice their size. Walking was agony. The infirmary had nothing, not a single pill. The military doctor told her she was sick because her willpower was weak and screamed at her. I waited until no one was looking, mixed a handful of cornmeal into water and pressed it to her lips. Tears ran down my face without a sound. She grabbed my hand and forced out a few words. "Corporal, if I die, can you get this diary to my little brother back home?" I wrote him letters saying I was eating well and doing fine. That's what I feel worst about. And through all of this, the officers' parties never stopped. From the direction of battalion headquarters, the smell of grilling meat drifted over to our post every single night. Their laughter and drinking songs carried through the cold air. They were feeding themselves on the blood of the people and treating us like decorations, something to dress up their entertainment. Then the threat arrived closer than ever. The lieutenant colonel's reach extended past Choi. So-hee came for me and Sergeant Kim. One evening I was summoned to his office. Drinks were already flowing. He grabbed my hand and smiled in a way that turned my stomach. "Corporal Park, you're almost done with your service. Don't you want a good job on the outside? One word from me and you've got a spot at a department store in Pyongyang. Easy work. Good life." His eyes had the gleam of a starving animal. I managed to get out of the room, shaking with a mix of terror and disgust. After that night, his surveillance and pressure became completely open. Making things worse, the unit's security officer began tightening his gaze on us. Someone had reported that we were whispering together at night. In the North Korean military, there's a ritual called Sengwal Chonghwa, a session where soldiers are required to expose each other's faults and report them to the party. During one of these sessions, the security officer pointed straight at me. "Corporal Park, your eyes have been different lately. There's a rumor you've been listening to South Korean broadcasts. Is that true?" Cold sweat poured down my spine. I denied it. But their stares had already marked us as potential traitors. By late December 2025, we knew there was nowhere left to retreat. Stay, and we'd either starve, be broken and discarded by the officers, or be taken away by the security forces and disappear without a trace. One night, the four of us gathered in the dark behind the laundry room. The howling winter wind covered our voices. Choi So-hee spoke first, her voice trembling but certain. We're living like livestock. Animals die when their owner decides, but humans find their own way. I'm going over. Anyone who wants to stay, stay. Report me if you want." Without a word, the three of us reached out and took her hands. Sergeant Kim, her knuckles white with cold and resolve, said, "Commander, I won't rot my youth in this hell any longer. I'm going with you." Private Lee nodded silently, tears streaming down her face. I met each of their eyes and held. This wasn't just a plan to escape. It was the founding of a unit willing to die. We knew exactly what crossing that fence meant. Landmines, automatic rifles ready to fire at anything that moved. Failure meant a public execution. For our families left behind, it meant guilt by association, punishment handed down through the generations. And yet, paradoxically, that brutal knowledge bound us tighter together. When despair reaches a certain depth, even fear loses its power. I understood that for the first time. From that night forward, we played a perfect role. In political study sessions, we shouted the slogans louder than anyone. At drills, we ran at the front. But every calculation in our minds was fixed on one thing: the gaps in the minefield, the timing of the guard rotation, and the coordinates of our crossing. The first dawn of a new life, or our last, was coming. We began our final preparations. After the decision was made, the hours moved the same as always on the outside. But the four of us were beating to a completely different rhythm. January's cruel cold had swallowed everything around us. We had fear at our backs and a gamble called freedom directly ahead. This wasn't like climbing a wall. What stood between us and the South was a killing field. Tens of thousands of buried landmines and automatic rifles with no hesitation and no mercy. Failure meant immediate execution. It meant our families would carry the punishment for the rest of their lives, under North Korea's guilt by association laws. But somehow that knowledge only fused us together more tightly. When despair goes deep enough, even fear stops meaning much. Choi So-hee, our commander, had been quietly risking her life for weeks. While pouring drinks for the officers and keeping them comfortable, she had burned the mine layout of our border sector into her memory. One night of forced smiling at a time. Anti-personnel mines here. Pressure mines here. 3 meters to the right of this boulder, that's the only clear path. The coordinates she whispered to us in the dark were more precious than anything written in any book. A single step off that line and we'd be unrecognizable. Sergeant Kim used years of frontline instinct to map the guard rotation and find the weak point in the patrol pattern. Between 200 and 300 in the morning, at -22 Fahrenheit, the Bay guard's alertness hit its lowest point. We had roughly 10 minutes. We called it the gap of fate. I packed as little as possible. Inside my uniform, one old family photograph from home, a small knife, and prepared for the worst, a cyanide capsule. If they caught us, I would end it myself. That was the last shred of dignity I was holding on to. Private Lee, thin as a wire, had been quietly working on the fence for days. Slowly, carefully, so no one would notice. She filed away at the rusted barbed wire with her bare hands. By the time she was done, her fingers were raw and bleeding, but her eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. "Corporal, I'm not scared. Starving to death here or stepping on a mine out there, what's the difference?" That hit all of us somewhere deep. As the preparations moved forward, homesickness cut through me like a blade. The blue sea at Wonsan, my mother's soybean paste stew, salty and warm, my little brother's laugh. If I leave, what happens to her? Every time that thought surfaced, my chest locked and I couldn't breathe. But I knew. Staying here, dying slowly like an animal, that was the heavier burden to leave my mother. And if South Korea was even half of what we'd been told, it wasn't if it was real. If it was livable, then maybe someday I could bring her there. It was an uncertain gamble. But inside that enormous prison called North Korea, it was the only act of resistance we had left. D-Day was set for the early morning of January 3rd, 2026. The forecast called for a historic blizzard and heavy winds at the front line that night. A gift from the sky. The snow would erase our footprints. The wind would swallow the sound of the wire being cut. We went through our final political study session as usual, then held each other's gaze for a long moment before parting. It was a silent promise, meet you on the other side. And maybe a final farewell. We each organized our belongings. If they found our lockers too clean, too tidy, what would they think? That we were traitors? Or secretly that they wished they'd done the same? I tucked a letter to my mother deep in the back of my locker. Mother, don't forgive your useless daughter. But today I'm leaving to become a human being. A letter I would never send. I pressed it to my chest. Then I looked up at the North Korean sky. One last time, the only sky I had ever known. Cold stars stared back down. The January air cut into my lungs with every breath, sharp enough to ache. But that ache was proof we were still alive, and that we had to stay that way. The die was cast. We were no longer instruments of the Korean Workers' Party. We were 4 women who had decided to write their own fate. We dissolved into the darkness and waited. When the clock hit 200 a.m., all 4 of our hearts were pounding hard enough to split open. Outside the barracks, a blizzard raged. Visibility was 0. The snow driving sideways at -22. Fahrenheit looked like a white curtain the sky had sent down to cover us. We moved out as planned, minimum gear, maximum silence. Each of us gripping the back of the uniform in front. Nothing to navigate by except the faint outline of the person ahead. The first obstacle was the guard post fence. Layers of barbed wire gleaming in the dark like the teeth of something hungry. Choi So-hee pulled out the wire cutters with trembling hands. Every snip stopped my heart. We held our breath, watching for the patrol. Our fingers had lost all feeling. The cold from the metal cutters drove straight through our gloves and into the bone. Finally, we had an opening just wide enough to squeeze through. One by one, without a word, we passed through. The moment we cleared that fence, we were no longer North Korean soldiers. We were runners, people who had burned the road back. But the real nightmare was waiting on the other side, the minefield. Choi So-hee's memorized coordinates were our last map. Follow exactly in my footsteps. 1 inch off and it's over. Her voice threaded through the howling wind like something solid. We moved as one body, 4 people sharing a single careful breath. The terror of not knowing what was buried an inch beneath the snow wrapped around every step. Each time I lifted a foot, the same thought, this might be the last one. North Korean wooden box mines buried under snow are nearly invisible, even to trained eyes. The tension was beyond anything I can describe. Our entire bodies were soaked in sweat, and that sweat was already freezing against our skin. Then it happened. Private Lee lost her footing and stumbled sideways. A short, strangled cry broke out. We all froze. She hadn't hit a mine, but a stone had rolled loose from under her foot, and the sound rang out across the silent mountain valley like a gunshot. A split second later, a flashlight from a nearby post swept the darkness. Then a voice. "Who's there?" The alarm began. "Run." Eyes forward. "Run." Choi So-hee's voice broke through the blizzard like a scream. We tore through the snow. Behind us, automatic rifle fire opened up. Tracer rounds' red streaks cut across the air just above our heads. My heart was in my throat. Every breath of frozen air shredded my lungs. But stopping wasn't an option. We all knew exactly what stopping would mean. We'd stopped thinking about the mines. The lights on the southern side were all that existed now. We ran for them like we were running out of the world itself. We fell. We got up. We fell again. Knees torn open, uniforms shredded. But we never let go of each other. Sergeant Kim hauled Private Lee to her feet. I pushed behind Choi So-hee. We moved forward. When the markers of the military demarcation line came into view, hot tears poured down my face and froze against my cheeks. But my chest was burning. Stay alive. You have to reach that ground. You have to. And then the last fence. The final line of barbed wire. On the other side, the lights of a South Korean guard post. Gunfire still chasing us from the north. We threw ourselves at that fence with everything we had left and cleared it. Then we collapsed face down onto the cold ground and gasped. January 2026, we had crossed. Every inch of us was torn and bleeding. Our minds were barely holding together. But the air against our faces, it was different. Not the smell of suppression. Something else entirely. The smell of freedom. We weren't safe yet. Behind us, North Korean search beams were slashing the dark in every direction. Occasional gunshots reminded us we were still in the crossfire. Not a single finger had the strength to move. But our hearts were hammering. Where are we? Did we actually make it? Then, out of the dark, a voice low, steady, and absolutely certain. "Hands up. Move and I shoot. Are you defecting to the south?" It was Korean, but not the sharp, clipped Korean I'd known my whole life. This voice was different, controlled, precise, but somehow warm underneath. My arms went up on instinct. One by one, Choi So-hee, Sergeant Kim, and an exhausted Private Lee raised their hands too. "We are defecting. We are female soldiers." My voice cracked, fear and relief splitting it apart. "Please don't shoot." A moment later, heavy footsteps emerged from the tree line and surrounded us. South Korean soldiers. Full tactical gear. Night vision helmets. bulletproof vests, and even in the cold, something in their bearing that read as strength, not desperation. Back in the North, we'd been told we were the elite. Standing before these soldiers, we felt like starving children. But their rifles were pointed north, not at us, to protect us. "You're safe now," one of them said, moving toward us to check for injuries. "Are you hurt?" That voice. Private Lee's legs buckled. She sat down in the snow and began to sob. In the North, crying meant weakness. It meant punishment. But the South Korean soldier didn't say a word of reproach. He just pressed a hand warmer into her palms. The warmth hit her skin and the ice on her hands began to melt. It wasn't just heat. It was something that had been frozen inside us for years, starting to thaw. We were escorted to a rear post. When I climbed into the military vehicle and felt the heater just a vehicle heater, nothing remarkable, it felt like a dream. In North Korea, even senior officers rarely had that. At the post, they brought us hot tea, thick blankets, and a meal. White rice. Steam rising off it. All four of us looked at each other the moment we saw it. We'd been surviving on corn mixed with rocks, stretched so thin. That malnutrition had become our natural state. That bowl of rice wasn't food. It was the first gesture of welcome South Korea had ever extended to us. What stunned me even more was the atmosphere of the place. North Korean military posts ran on fear surveillance, criticism, tension. This post was alive, calm and alive. No one's face showed hunger. The soldiers treated each other like people. An officer came over and looked at us for a long moment. "You made a tremendous decision," he said. "You've been through so much. You've been through so much." 5 words. They washed over years of degradation, years of hunger and humiliation like water over stone. I could hardly hold myself together. Outside the window, even in the dead of winter, the southern landscape blazed with light, streetlights glowing through every curve of the mountain road. Lights that would never have existed outside of central Pyongyang in the north. Looking at those lights, I knew we hadn't just crossed a border. We had crossed from darkness into something else entirely. Choi So-hee sat quietly beside me, her hands folded like she was praying. I knew what she was holding. Guilt for the family left behind. And running through it, unstoppable the shock of this light, this warmth, this air. That night, January 3rd, 2026, we will never let go of. Under the protection of the South Korean military for the first time in our lives, we fell asleep without fear. Tomorrow would bring more questions, new surroundings, unfamiliar systems. But never again would we have to trade our dignity for food or shed tears because of someone's power over us. Freedom isn't found in grand proclamations. It's a warm bowl of rice, a word of respect, a night you can close your eyes without dreading the morning. South Korea had built itself into something extraordinary, not just wealthy, but deeply committed to protecting those simple things. I felt that in my bones that night, sitting in that small mountain post. We had crossed the line. We were in. Next, I'll tell you about Hanawon, the Resettlement Center, and what happened when we met the real South Korea. The culture shocks, the wonder, and the long road to becoming citizens. It's been exactly 1 month since we set foot on South Korean soil. 1 month. And sitting here right now, clean clothes, warm room, I still can't fully believe it. For those of us who had lived in terror of the North Korean security apparatus, where being taken in for questioning often meant you never came back, the past 30 days have been nothing short of miraculous. Fear has been replaced slowly and steadily by something I had no name for at first. I've come to recognize it now. It's gratitude. During those first few days of questioning, I had to keep reminding myself I wasn't dreaming. The investigator reached across the table, took my hand, and said before anything else, "Corporal Park, it's over now. How are you feeling? Is there anything you'd like to eat?" I couldn't respond. I just cried. In the North, I was a tool of the party, a disposable resource for the officers above me. No one had ever called me Corporal Park with that kind of weight, as if I were a person who deserved care. Private Lee, who had been in the worst shape among us, was taken to a military hospital. Tests. Nutritional care. Within a month, she was recovering faster than any of us had dared to hope. South Korean medicine in 2026 brought back a woman who had been fading in front of our eyes. What the investigation revealed about South Korea was the opposite of everything we'd been taught back north. In the examination room, a television showed footage of Seoul in 2026. I stared at it and finally asked out loud, "Is that really what it looks like right now?" The investigator smiled and handed me a smartphone. In that small screen was everything happening in real time. Convenience stores open at 3 in the morning, streets full of cars, and the faces of people smiling, laughing, moving freely, talking without looking over their shoulders. Watching them, I felt the full weight of the cage I had lived in for my entire life. Now we've moved to Hanawon, the government resettlement center for North Korean defectors. This is where we take our first steps toward becoming South Korean citizens. Mornings here are different from the first breath. In the north, waking up meant immediately calculating. How do I get through the hunger today, and who will be watching me? Here, mornings start with a different question entirely. What will I learn today? What part of this new world will I get to see? Choi So-hee, now just older sister to the rest of us, can't sleep most nights since learning what a liberal democracy actually means. She keeps grabbing my hand and whispering, "The government is here to protect us, not watch us." Is this really real? The biggest shock came during information class, when we encountered the internet for the first time. Our instructor pulled up satellite imagery of the border sector. We had guarded with our lives. All four of us went completely still. Every fence, every post, every blind spot. We thought we knew, completely visible from above. Like looking at your palm. Sergeant Kim let out a hollow laugh. We were sitting at the bottom of a well. They could see everything. And we were just starving each other and pointing rifles at ourselves. Everything we had believed about North Korea's strength and standing in the world collapsed in that moment. Yesterday, we tried South Korean snacks for the first time. Trendy sweets, warm canned coffee. The moment the sweetness hit my tongue, my throat tightened. I thought of my brother back home. Do I deserve this? The guilt came fast. But right underneath it, something harder formed. I have to succeed here. I have to go back for him. South Korea isn't just a prosperous country. It is a place where people are allowed to live like people, a land of genuine opportunity. Outside the window, the winter wind is still blowing. But inside this education hall at Hanawon, the warmth of people learning together is real. We're studying how to open a bank account, how to use public transit, what our rights and responsibilities as South Korean citizens are. Everything is new. Everything is hard. But the four of us push each other forward. The women who were North Korea's frontline female soldiers are now officially, legally Park Ji-yoon, Choi Si-yeona, Kim Young-hee, and Lee Yoon-byul, citizens of the Republic of Korea. This 1 month has been the most precious of my life. We're not fully ready yet. Everything still frightens us a little. But behind us stands South Korea, a country that opened its arms to strangers and called them its own. We haven't forgotten that. Next, I'll tell you about more of what we encountered as our Hanawon education continued. And the moment we finally stepped out into society, the march toward our freedom has only just begun. The cold wind is still hammering the windows. The thermometer hasn't broken freezing. But inside my chest, there is a heat I have never felt before in my life. 1 month ago, in the first days of January, I was crawling on my stomach across a frozen minefield. Now I am living an ordinary day. Every single hour of it is a miracle. The cold in North Korea at the front line was a cold that killed. Here in South Korea, the same cold feels like anticipation winter, giving way to something coming. Seoul in 2026 is beyond anything I had imagined. Not just the wealth, the welcome of it. The settlement process, the questioning, the paperwork, the preparation was the most respected I have ever felt in my life. The day they handed me my temporary ID card, I pressed that small rectangle to my chest and couldn't stop crying. In the north, I was someone's daughter or the party's instrument. This card said something different. It said, "You belong here." South Korea in 2026 isn't the American colony our instructors told us it was. It is the proud achievement of our people. Prosperous, free, respected around the world. The four of us who crossed that line together are each moving towards something of our own now. Choi So-hee, older sister, has traded her uniform for a warm padded jacket. The sadness that lived in her eyes is gone. She is preparing to work with a North Korean human rights organization. Using everything she's been through, she smiles differently now. Openly, Sergeant Kim has fallen headfirst into cooking. Surrounded by South Korea's abundance of ingredients, she keeps saying, "When the day comes that I can feed the people back home with this, I can't wait for that day." She's sharpening her skills. Private Lee, the youngest, the one we almost lost, has color in her cheeks now. She wears a pretty coat and walks like someone who has decided to be here. Every time I see her, I know crossing that minefield was the right choice. The greatest pride I carry as a South Korean now isn't the technology or the economy, it's the warmth of the people. A warm can of coffee handed to me at a convenience store. A citizen on the street who stopped, smiled, and pointed me in the right direction when I was lost. In the North, every stranger was a potential informant. Here, small kindnesses are simply the default. Every time I see the South Korean flag flying as I walk down the street, I catch myself placing my hand over my heart. This country treats the life of each individual citizen as something that matters. I feel that every day. But there is a pain that hasn't fully healed. My family in the North. On cold days like today, I think of my mother and brother, on the coast at Wonsan, holding their empty stomachs. I wake up at night with tears already on my face. But I've made a decision. I won't stay submerged in grief. Succeeding here, living well here, being happy here, that is the most powerful form of resistance against the regime. That took so much from us. I am no longer a soldier with a rifle. I am a witness living proof that freedom is worth everything. I will not forget what we lived through. I will not forget what waited on the other side. I will keep recording both. The spring coming is the first one I will greet as a free person. I know what it means to have freedom taken from you. I know its value better than most. And I will spend the rest of my life insisting on it. For myself, for the people still trapped, for anyone who needs to hear that a different life is possible. Every morning I open the window and make the same promise to myself. Be grateful. Today I get to live like a human being. Don't waste it. Our story doesn't end here. This is just the first page. Someday when that day of reunification comes, I will find my mother in a free land and hold her. I walk toward that day every morning without looking back. To everyone who stayed with our story until the end, thank you. From the bottom of my heart. Your support is part of why we made it here. Why we were able to be reborn. Thank you. Truly.